So I asked her a question. I said, so you know about slaves? And she knows about slaves. She learned about slaves in kindergarten. I mean, the school system, has no problem teaching young people about slaves, especially the school systems. We have her in a school system trying to get her a very good education, so they don't mind teaching about slaves and Martin Luther King, and the civil rights movement and nonviolence and all that stuff. But then I asked my daughter, I said, did you know that the slaves came from Africa? And then she had a puzzled look on her face. She had no idea, like, what's Africa? So in the minds of my daughter, that black people today, and we are living who we are, and we're interacting with white folks, but we came from slaves, and that was it. It was almost like the initial ancestors of black folks were slaves and nothing else. And I began to share with her about Africa, and I began to share with her about the civilization, about the mathematics, about Africa, algebra, complex algebra used by the Africans 2,000 years before Jesus Christ was born. I mean, I'm explaining to her the civilization of the people that all she saw were these slaves. Even when she's looking at these pictures, and the black and white pictures of these sharecropping, newly emancipated slaves, that's what she's seeing is our history, and that's it. But I had to share with her, there's a tremendous history prior to slavery. Slavery is not where we started, okay? And I think as African Americans, as black folks, we need to get that out of our minds, okay? And the African Americans, and maybe even that term, kind of, I don't know if it kind of guides us away from the truth, but we need to recognize the civilization of the Africans that were taken into custody and that were enslaved for hundreds of years. Now understand this, they had their own language, they had their own religion, they had their own alphabet, they were doing algebra 2,000 years BC. So think about what was going on in Europe in 2000 BC, 2,000 years before Jesus Christ was born. What kind of people, what was going on in Europe? And at that time, Africans were utilizing complex algebra, okay? You see what I'm saying? So what I'm suggesting is things aren't exactly the way we've bought and even allowed our children to believe they are. We watch Huck Finn and, Jim. But anyway, I'm suggesting if you look at, say, Europeans, and say the situation was reversed, and Africans were able to go to Europe and take slaves. Because a lot of times we say today, and many people say, well, the slaves, they were, warring and fighting with each other. So the first slaves, they were given to the white man, or sold to the white man by other blacks. Well, look what was going on in Europe. I mean, you have all this warfare going on with first you can go far back to the Goths and the Visigoths and all this stuff. Or you can look at the Napoleonic Wars and all this. So Europeans were always fighting each other as well. So suppose you had Britain and France, in a conflict, and then France sold a bunch of their prisoners to the Africans, and the Africans took them back to Africa, okay? So the people that were in Europe were somewhat civilized, we know that, from art and from writings and all this stuff. But if they were taken as slaves to another land, okay, where they didn't look anything like the other people and their language was nothing like it, and they weren't allowed to speak their own language, they were beaten, they were tortured, they were murdered, they were lynched by the millions, okay? And for say 300 years they were controlled, and they were bred, and they were sold and separated and bred like dogs. We'll take this male and this female. We need some more slaves, so we'll breed them. If that was done to white Europeans in another nation where they couldn't speak their own tongue and they were beginning to learn some of the African languages, they would seem just as ignorant. And given 300 years of that kind of generational slavery, what do you think European white folks would look like in an African nation with that kind of history? Okay? So what I'm saying, so you wouldn't see the Rembrandts, and you wouldn't see the Michelangelo, and you wouldn't be aware of all the great artistry and even the Pythagoras and all the mathematics and all of the discoveries and scientific accomplishments of the white Europeans, because all you have are the result of breeding of them as slaves, breeding out any kind of intellect, any kind of language, anything from their past. They wouldn't even know. In 200 or 300 years, they wouldn't even know the history that they had in Europe, okay? So what I'm suggesting today, as African Americans, we need to begin to grasp and understand that slavery was a bump in our ancestral line. And so sort of like if you were a man and you were a healthy man, and say at age 30 or so, you came down with a debilitating sickness, okay, that lasted 20 years. And at 50 years old, you're trying to regain your senses, regain your motor skills, regain everything about you. You need to understand, I believe your therapist will get you to understand that lump of human flesh, that vegetable that couldn't think, couldn't talk, couldn't move, is not who you are. That you were a man before you came to that bump in your life, and you were trying to regain and get back to that person that you once were and become more improved. But in order for your therapy to be effective, you have to visualize the person that you were before that bump in your life, okay? And what I'm suggesting, so that in a symbolic way as African Americans, we need to realize for ourselves that slavery is not where we began. That we were civilized beyond European civilization in some countries in Africa. I mean, come on now, look at the pyramids.